All right. Welcome, everyone, to Implicit Bias. Your presenters today are Megan and Sarah. So, ladies, take it away.
Why, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, to this beautiful in-service day. Okay, so I did just throw in the chat the link to the presentation that I'm going to be using. I believe it's also linked where you clicked to come to the meeting. The presentation is linked in there as well. But I know sometimes it's easier just to have it in the chat. So we're going to talk today about implicit bias, what we don't think that we think. So we're going to be going through a couple things. We're going to be going through what implicit bias does and what kind of happens in your brain. And just talking about different ways that we can recognize it in ourselves and change how we react to it. So I believe we're going to start with an activity that Sarah is going to lead us in. Sarah, if you just want to tell me when to click, I can do the clicking for you.
All right, sounds good. So for this activity, you guys are going to want a piece of paper and something to write with. It doesn't have to be any kind of nice paper. It can be a sticky note or an index card or whatever you have on hand, but you're going to want something to jot a couple things down. So I'll give you all a minute to find that.
And you're not going to share your paper with anybody else. It's just kind of like for you.
All right. Once you have your paper, Megan, you can go ahead and click. You're going to jot down the names of 6 people you trust who are not members of your family. So we'll take a couple minutes to do that.
Ooh,
that's our bell. You can ignore that.
That was a fun noise. That's way better than our bell. Our bell is terrifying.
Yes, Drew, good question. Friends count as not family.
Yes. I think we're probably good. I feel like most people have 6.
Yeah, I can't see everyone, so it's a little hard to tell, but hopefully you have 6 people. If not, you can just do this with however many people you have so far. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of descriptions. And if the people that you wrote down have these things in common with you, you're going to put a check mark next to them. So Megan, go to the first one. The first thing you're going to check off are people who have the same gender identity as you. The next thing you're going to check off is people on your list who are the same race as you. Next is people who have the same sexual orientation. The next one is people who have the same ability, mental and physical ability as you. Next is people who share your religion or spiritual beliefs. And the last one is people who are within the same age range as you, so plus or minus 7 years of your current age. And then at this point, take a look at what you checked off, how many check marks are next to each person. And if we could get a few brave souls to share something that they've noticed about this list. Barb, go ahead.
Hey, probably not surprising. I bet a lot are similar to me that the 6 people I wrote down, most of them had most of those check marks.
And I think David just typed that 4 of 6 people matched every category with him.
Did anyone else notice anything similar to what Barb and David have shared or very different from what they've shared? Oh God, can't see. Same as above, same.
A lot of sames. Somebody said nobody matched every category with them. Mr. Hampton has trust issues. Mixed.
Awesome. So one of the things that this activity is used to point out is something called affinity bias or in-group bias, and it's a tendency to form connections with people who are like you. And the thing to note about that is it's largely instinctual and unconscious. And for people who didn't share a lot in common with their inner circle of trust, it's worth thinking about how individual experiences can disrupt affinity bias. If it would be interesting to hear if any of those people had early life experiences where they were exposed to a lot of people different than them, and what kind of situations they came from. So Megan, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, okay. I just didn't want to like interrupt if you were not done. So yeah. So no, this was just like a quick activity to kind of like get your brains thinking about, oops, I have to be on the correct page to click to the next thing about what implicit bias is. And so this was from an article, and it's just, normally I don't put this many words, but it was just a really good like amount of information. So when's the last time a stereotype popped into your mind? If you're like most people, it happens all the time. It just means that your brain is working properly, noticing patterns and making generalizations. But the same thought processes that make people smart can also make them biased. This tendency for stereotyping, confirming thoughts to pass spontaneous through our minds is what psychologists call implicit bias. So it sets people up to overgeneralize and sometimes leading to discrimination, even when people feel they are being fair. So the first thing to like really know about implicit bias is it is a biological thing that your brain does, and it is not your fault. It doesn't make you a racist. So it happens automatically, and it comes from a couple of different things, which we're going to read about in an article. I know you're all so excited. You're like, oh, reading. So there's an article linked here, which I will put the link in the chat. And I want you to take a couple minutes to just read this. It's not very long, so I'm thinking like 5-10 minutes max. Hold on, I have to get to the right page with the right tab, which is the right link. So here's the link for the article. It's like a page and a half. So just take a second to read that, and then we're going to just go through it together as a group. So the way I like to do read-throughs is if you are done reading, click the raise your hand button so then we can see when everybody's done reading. Okay, I'm gonna move us along because I just counted about a little over 50 people have raised their hand. So I'm guessing we're pretty close to done. So take a second to just unraise your hands because it's just gonna keep doing that to me the entire time.
Since I'm the host, I can also I'm going to hit lower all hands.
Oh, I didn't know that was even possible. Thank you.
I'm the meeting host, so I have the power. So everyone's hands should be down now.
All right. So I really enjoyed this article when I first read it. Because not only does it it gives you a good example of what a teacher having to deal with this, but it talks about why. So I'm going to break it up into the 3 sections and we're just going to go over them and any questions. So while the brain isn't wired to be racist, it uses bias as unconscious defensive shortcuts. So pretty much our brain wants to group things. It wants to put things together and organize things and organize our life around us. So it has this need to put things into categories, which is great for a lot of things, but kind of cruddy for stereotyping and bias. So implicit bias is just the unconscious attitudes and beliefs that shape our behavior towards someone perceived as inferior or as a life-threatening outsider. Which most of the time in our lives, we're not being threatened by an outsider, but that's how our brain kind of goes through the situations and decides if it's something that you have to react to or if it's something that's safe. So it's the safety system gone haywire in our bodies, which comes from, way long ago when we had to categorize things and put things into all these different areas to make sure that we survived. So how do I recognize it? What do I have to do to really change these quick judgments, these quick systems that my brain does automatically? So the what the article went through is checking your assumptions is the easiest one. I think the example they used was just making sure. So how are you interpreting students' behavior or a student's reaction to what you've asked them to do? And then just take a second to be okay, am I interpreting it through a lens that maybe that isn't the situation? Is there any way else I can interpret that situation? And then just in daily life, looking for those patterns of am I doing this over and over and over again? And kind of paying attention to your body's sensations and the signals that you have that come along with fear or concern or threat. So I know I'll throw myself out there. I have this happen most often to me if I am walking anywhere and I feel there is an unknown man around me because I am a woman and I have just that fear of that's a threat. I know I have it. I know every time I pass a man on the sidewalk does not mean it's a threat, but I know that it's there and it happens automatically without my without the conscious part of my brain thinking about it. It's just an instant fear response that I have. So then I'll talk more about that in a second. So number 2 is the brain uses the nervous system to kind of sniff out that implicit bias. So my brain is wired to do that to keep me safe. So neuroception, which they talked about in the article, is just the unconscious system that the brain uses to determine if something is safe or dangerous. And that, again, that system is set up for our survival. It's set up so that, if we enter a situation and there is something dangerous, we make that quick connection and we switch how our reaction would be to that situation. So there's just a quote from the article that in the case of cross-racial relationships, neuroception heightens the student's awareness of the teacher's threatening microaggressions. Just a student of color or any student who is identifies as different from you coming into a situation with you as the person in power over them, because you are the teacher, you do hold a certain amount of power. So they already come in with that heightened sense of like slight bit of fear, even though it's not conscious to them. So like they're going to enter your room that way. So if you're thinking about that, like when I pass a man on the sidewalk, I have that unconscious fear response. Even though we're both adults, it's probably nothing. We're both like going to be fine. But like think about if kids are coming into your classroom and they're perceiving you as different, think about how that might respond in their brain, like what they're automatically thinking. And that they might be having that fear response towards you, even though you're not a threat. And you know you're not a threat, but their little brains are thinking, that's scary, they're different, they're a threat. Nobody looks like me in here. Because if you think about it, really often when we have kids of color in our class, usually it's one kid who looks different from everybody else. So just think about like that kind of like, that reaction is happening in their brain. And they're so little, they might not even realize that it's happening. So how do we avoid this? How do we like change this reaction? So learning about, in terms of your students, learn about and connect with them. Learn about what connection and what like things look like from their cultural point of view. And you can start using some of those tools as the teacher to like kind of make them feel comfortable. I will say with this one, when I read that one at first, it made me a little bit nervous because there's a fine line between like learning about someone else's culture and kind of like thinking about ways that you can integrate that into your classroom, and cultural appropriation, which is taking something from another culture and like making it yours as the person in the dominant culture. So just be very like conscious of like, if you're doing that, like make sure that what you're doing is appropriate in terms of cultural appropriation. I like their example. Like their example was that a lot of times food is a common way to connect in a lot of cultures. So that's obviously something that's not appropriation. You sharing food with your students and bringing like a treat in for them, it would be fine. But you don't want to like, trying to think of a negative example, and I can't right now, but like, yeah. So just be mindful that you're not walking that fine line with that particular one. And then obviously practicing affirmation and validation. Like everybody wants to be validated. Everybody wants to be affirmed. They want to feel good about themselves. So just making sure that like, that you're affirming kids along with any discipline that you do have to have in the classroom, making sure that all your interactions aren't negative. And noticing when your interactions are often negative. Hold on one second, Emily. When your interactions, if you're having a lot of negative interactions with kids, just be conscious of that, and then maybe make sure to like do the affirmations as well. And I believe what was Emily's question?
Before that, I was going to bring up, Kayla had asked a question. Can you give a quick cultural appropriation, like either a definition or a quick little explanation on that?
Yes.
I know that's another whole session, but
that's just another whole session, but I'll give you a little quick.
The elevator speech.
So cultural appropriation. So there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation when it comes to studying and learning about other cultures. So I'm going to give you an example as an art teacher. Masks. Lots of cultures use masks in many different ways for many different reasons, be it religious or traditions or, whatever the reasoning may be. If I'm going to do a mask project in my classroom, we might look at how different cultures use masks and how different cultures represent things in masks. And then I would have, for appreciation, what I would do is we would look at that, we would talk about it, we would have a conversation around how those different cultures use those masks. And then I would have the kids design a mask that shows who they are and where they come from and their culture, versus we're going to study African masks and then all the white kids in my class are going to make a copy of an African mask. That would be cultural appropriation versus learning about the culture and kind of taking the ideas behind the masks and making our own version of what that is. So it's just, I mean, yeah, you're welcome, Kayla. A really easy way to think about it too is like, I am a white person. If I start acting in a way that like people of color act in the culture with each other, like if I start acting black, I'm appropriating their culture. Like I'm taking that and I'm using it for myself as a white person. Yes, Erin.
All right, so this came up. My husband and I watched The Neighborhood. I don't know if any of you watched that show, but they just did a thing on implicit bias where a character was pretending to be a black woman who was going to teach black classes. So if you're looking for like an example and you want to do like a quick, like, oh, that was an eye-opener, so this is exactly what you're talking about, pretending to be somebody you're not and bringing it to your kids. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way a quick, succinct way to put it. Thank you very much, Erin. But like, yeah, pretending to be something you're not and bringing it to your kids and showing them how to do that thing. So just be mindful of that as you like want to connect with kids and their culture and where they come from. And then Emily Brooks says the amygdala can't differentiate between physical and emotional danger, right? Oh my God, I'm so scared to answer this because I'm pretty sure Emily is one of our counselors. So I don't believe the amygdala can differentiate between the difference. It just senses fear. Okay, do we ignore our...
Yeah, so the Sciency end of things.
Thank you.
Physical or emotional danger, either way, will trigger the fight or flight reactions. So, and that's where what Megan's talking about, the subconscious wiring of how your brain works. If your implicit bias has a fear reaction or a threat reaction, it will trigger that fight or flight system in your body the same way that an actual physical danger would. So that yes, I hope that clarifies.
Yes.
And then Amy's got a question as well.
Yes, I was just Amy's question: do we ignore or point out their differences? I say that to my black female student, your hair is so curly. I've always wanted curly hair. I love it. Or just ignore the differences and not point them out and make them self-conscious. That is a great question. So I would say that you should never ignore differences because that's just a form of color blindness. I have definitely made it a point to, don't comment on other people's bodies. However, I will say that little girls of color have very specific hairstyles that they get done, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and they often don't get a compliment on their hair because it's so different from the white cultural norm. So I actually did have a little girl of color in one of my classes who came in recently with brand new braids. And I just quietly, just to her, not in front of the whole class, I said, I noticed that you just are your braids new? And she told me yes. And I said, they look really pretty. And like, that was like the end of the conversation. And I didn't do it in front of the entire class because that feels weird to be like standing in front of the class and going like, hey, you look good today. You look good today. But just like, I do make it a point that if I have a kid of color come in and they've done something like gotten their hair braided, that's a big deal for them. And that I do say it to them that it looks nice. I probably wouldn't say, oh, your hair is so curly, I want curly hair, because that, I don't know, that kind of feels odd. I would make it a point that if they've done something different is a okay point to talk to them personally about it. Like if I come in and my hair is bright purple, I fully expect people to be like, hey, you dyed your hair, I really like it. Yeah, thank you, Erin. It's just like noticing a child with a new haircut. That's a great way to example. Marcia.
I would just add to that, Megan, that my rule of thumb is I'm not going to if I wouldn't say that to the little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl's hair, why would I say it to that biracial child? And my niece is biracial, and I can't even tell you how many times people have mentioned her hair and how curly and how adorable it is, but they don't say anything to the other girls in the class. So for me, I think about, well, if I wouldn't comment on, other students' hair, other white students' hair, then I'm not going to say that to the BiPOC child either.
Yeah. And just for people who don't know, BiPOC is, I'm going to mess this up. I forgot what
Black,
the B is. Black,
Indigenous, and people of color.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, the B. So again, that's why I'm saying, like, she came in with brand new braids in, and I mentioned that her hair looked really nice. I do the same thing for any kid who comes in with a haircut, or if they have, like, if their hair is drastically different. I do the same thing for any kid who comes in with different hair. So I don't do it just for the little girl of color or the little boy of color. I would do it for any kid that came in with a new hairstyle. I would compliment them in the same way. So yeah, I just didn't want that to be construed as I only said it to that one little girl. But anytime a kid comes in with new hair or new shoes and they want to share, like I make sure that they get the same kind of compliment. So thank you. Those were excellent questions. Let me see. Okay. So the biggest way to combat your implicit bias is that trust calms the brain's watchdog. So trust is what stops your brain from having that trigger, which is why, like, when I pass a male colleague of mine in the hallway at school, I don't get that fear response because I know them, I trust them, we have a relationship, versus passing somebody I don't know on the sidewalk. I still have that slight fear response. So yeah, this is just another excellent way that the article put it, is that the antidote to triggering the amygdala in the brain's fear center is building trust. The brain feels safest and relaxed when we are, when we are connected to others, we trust and treat us well. So obviously you all build trust with your students. I know that you all do, because I'm sure you're all amazing teachers and educators. So, but just tips for building trust in general, particularly with students. This is my favorite one, is the first one, is be vulnerable and real with your students. My biggest example is apologize. Seeing an adult apologize for doing something incorrect or something they didn't realize was wrong is huge for kids, because it gives away a little bit of that power that you hold almost. And it shows the kids that you do recognize that you're not a perfect human being. Create affinities and connections around you, or around similarities you and the students share, which is, another reason why, like, when kids come in that I might, I might have a conversation, like, as they enter the room, I might say, oh, your haircut looks really great, or those look like new shoes. Oh man, I like your dinosaur shirt. Like, just like creating those connections as they come in, or as kids offer them. A lot of the times, like, kids will be like, oh man, I went to the monster truck show over the weekend and it was really amazing and really fun. And you might be like, oh wow, I've never been to a monster truck show, but that sounds like a lot of fun. Tell me more about it. I know you all do this. Like, this is not new information for you as teachers. And then just redefining the in-group versus the out-group. And just, this one's a little bit harder. Like, when I read this, I was a little like, what? So just making sure that as you're building connections and creating similarities between you and students, that you're not accidentally creating an in-group and an out-group. So in terms of, like, racial justice and, like, racism and all that, like, the white people would be the in group, and then everybody else is would be the out group, you know? So just making sure that like that is a lot of like how racism works and how society defines it and like all that. So just making sure that like recognizing that and making sure that you're shifting that idea that just because somebody looks different or is different, they're not the out. They're a part of our group. They're a part of our classroom community. Okay, so hang on. I know there was a couple things in the chat that I just wanted to like validate. And so yeah, Mary Margaret, I hear you. I just like, there's a lot of debate over like what words to use to talk about people and how they identify, and some people prefer different language. So like, yes, some people don't prefer the term BiPOC. Some people don't prefer the term people of color. Like some people just prefer to be called Black. Like, so it depends on the person, and just being as respectful as you can, using the terminology as best that you can. So Barb, yes, thank you, Barb. Barb is saying, just agreeing that like building positive relationships is the most important part. And honestly, building positive relationships with our students and thinking about that, like you don't learn if you don't feel safe, and feeling safe is the easiest way. Like that's the quickest way to get to a kid. So Nancy is saying she's struggling with social studies and the use of simulations. Adapting to simulation means to have students connect to periods of history. That is a great question, and anybody else can feel free to jump in. So Nancy does, I know she does simulations in her classrooms of like how the kids study history. I would just be very careful and make sure, Nancy, that when you're doing simulations, that you're making sure that you're not just basing it off of stereotypical situations or stereotypes, that you're including the whole culture, and also just making it really clear to kids that like that there might be more to this culture than you're studying. And obviously you're not doing anything like having the kids dress up as ancient culture, like these ancient peoples. I think I've been in your class when you've done that, and it's more of like a, here's how the society functioned, versus like you're not really having them like reenact. So yeah. So there's lots of great research on that, Nancy, that through Learning for Justice, which I will give you that resource. And then I believe Scott had his hand up first, and then nope, somebody took their hand.
Yeah, I just want to say that my guess is, and it's a guess, that probably where we are, our implicit bias is showing up most commonly with students who come to us with various traumas. And kind of going back up to step one, how do we identify it? How do we recognize it? I think through some learning that I've done, I think that if you hear yourself or notice yourself placing blame, I think that's a good indicator that your implicit bias is informing that. If you're blaming, if you're tending to blame the student or blaming the family, as kind of, as a way to perhaps mitigate the threat that you feel because that student is presenting issues in the classroom that you feel are out of your control, and no one likes to feel that way in a classroom, then that's a good indicator that implicit bias is working there. So I think just noticing that, cultivating a self-awareness, like, oh, I'm placing blame here. How else can I frame this situation?
Yeah.
How can I listen?
Yeah. And I will say that this doesn't just apply to like people who are a different race of you or a different gender or anything like that. Like I have a couple students who drive me up the wall, just how they interact and how they behave. And they're different kids. Like one's really like like vocal and outgoing and defiant, and one is just needy. And like, I have to check myself when working with those kids. Like the neediness is totally a trigger for me. It's like, it drives me insane when it's like pretending that they can't do anything for themselves. I know that's a trigger, and I have to be really careful when I have that student in class that I'm like being like, okay, take a deep breath. I know this drives you nuts. You have to interact with this student like you'd interact with any other student asking for help. That doesn't mean I'm going to do stuff for them, but just being careful that what I'm portraying on the outside doesn't show that irritation on the inside. Matt, go ahead.
I just wanted to share, based on Nancy's question, something I had learned from just an online professional development course that I did that was about teaching about the lives of enslaved people. And I remember that there was a situation at like Rutland Middle School, or I think it was a few years ago, where there was a little bit of an issue with the way that they were teaching a unit about slavery in the early colonial America. And that really what came out of the issue is that there was like talking about enslaved people as like just like a commodity, and not building in, which it is important to know that that was being done in history, but not building in any recognition of the humanity of the people who were enslaved. And so this course that I took was really about when you teach about slavery and its development, which does have some economic pieces that you need to teach, that you also should build in learning about the experience that enslaved people went through by reading their narratives and things like that were left behind. And so I've thought about that with Nancy's question, whereas if you're in, doing some kind of historical simulation, like the importance of, if you can find the resources, if the voices of people from that culture can be used in the study of whatever situation you're doing, so that you're representing like the people in the historical situation and not kind of ignoring that individuality of people in different cultures. So I don't know, that might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt.
All right. I do see some other questions popping up. However, we are right at the end of our time here. So if you have additional questions, I'm sure Megan and Sarah would be happy to go over any of that stuff with you. So I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat for the exit ticket form. So please go ahead and fill that out.
I have an exit ticket.
Oh,
I have one more slide. I'm so sorry. Yes, definitely do the exit ticket for Alina, because that'll actually get you the professional development credit. But I have the last slide has some resources. There's a couple different articles on implicit bias that I hunted down for you all. The test yourself for hidden bias link is actually through Harvard. They have some really interesting like testing simulate things where you like click, and it's really interesting because like it brings up a lot. And then there's just some really good videos explaining explicit bias. And then if you wouldn't mind, this teal, actually, let me see if I can get you the link so you don't have to try and click on it. So, excuse me, this will bring you to a Jamboard. If you could just give me, like, post something that you learned today or something that you are going to want to try in your own classroom, or just something that you recognize that you need to work on or anything like that, that would be lovely. Thank you all. And then Alina, did you have anything else? Because I totally interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure people realize to fill out the PD form, put the title of this session.
Yes.
Yeah, the one that I linked. It's also linked on the coach's website, and that you just round to 1 hour for when it asks the length of time, and you will get your PD certificate, and then give Megan and Sarah some stuff on their Jamboard. Thank you so much, everybody.
Megan, can you make sure? Can you make sure you
The
put
link
us
is
as?
shareable.
Sorry, can you put us